Good evening. Before I start my lesson this evening, I'd like to give a little spiel here. On May the 6th and May the 7th, there's an event called Jazz Fest in Murfreesboro. This event almost didn't happen this year due to lack of money, but not of lack of interest. A bunch of the community was basically in an uproar when this event was about to close. But if you are interested in that form of music, please go. This event may not happen again next year. It almost didn't happen this year. It's important to me, so please don't feel obligated to go. But if you do enjoy that kind of music, the community would really love your support. Good afternoon. I'm grateful for the privilege to speak with you this Wednesday, and I've entitled this lesson, "Where is Your Heart?" I got this idea about 2 months back. About that time, I was still taking private lessons for playing the tuba, and I was playing one of my prepared pieces for college. I was playing through my slower and more lyrical piece, and for my non-musicians out there, it was the purdy one. I was playing through it, and I thought, I did pretty well. Was not my best run, I will admit that, but I didn't think it was my worst. After I get done playing, my lessons teacher is sitting there with a copy of his version of the score. He's looking at it, he goes, pretty good. Just one question for you. Where's your soul, man? And I sat in my chair, tuba in hand, and I kind of just froze for a second. I didn't really know what to say. And after that, I fixed it. And before I go any further, I would like to clarify that the use of the word soul in music is more used to use the word of emotion and the feeling you put behind into playing an instrument, singing, or even conducting. And that got me thinking. It didn't really sit right with me after he said it. And it definitely made me a lot more conscious about the emotion and the amount of feeling I put through the music that I play from there on out. It got me thinking, where is your heart? Where it should be? Well, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, it says, "For your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Well, where's your treasure? Well, it should be with God and the idea of living the faithful Christian life and getting to heaven. Now that we've gone over where your heart is and where it should be, I'd like to jump back to the story of my lessons teacher. The whole point of asking you all here tonight and the people watching from home where your heart is obviously stemmed from asking me where your soul was. How much emotion, how much feeling, how much appreciation you're putting into what you're doing. Let's take a moment, if you will. Let's say you're given 2 performances of Beethoven's Für Elise, a very beautiful, very classic piano melody, and 2 people are ready to go perform it at, I don't know, let's say Carnegie Hall, biggest venue of their life, and you have to make the decision who gets it, who doesn't. You listen to their first recording, listening to it, and it is the most mundane piece of music you have heard in your life. There's no emotion behind it. There's no feeling. There's nothing. It's just some average Joe sitting behind a piano playing something he learned what it seemed like 10 minutes ago, because there's no emotion and there's no feeling into what you're putting out. So your first thought is, well, you push that one to the side and you click on the second video, the recording, and it's this different person sitting behind the piano. Well, this person, they play. They get all prepared in that mental mindset, they take a deep breath, and they play the most beautiful rendition of this piece you have heard in your life. Now, which one are you going to choose? I would hope the second one, because if not, you're going to have a lot of very unhappy people at Carnegie Hall that night. Now, think, what would God want? Right? Would he want the person who just gets up here, does a lesson, just kind of throws it together 10 minutes beforehand, gets up here, says a bunch of words, the audience is all sitting there like, is it over yet? Can we go home? Go to class? Let's go on, let's go. Or is God going to want the person that gets up here and for weeks maybe not for weeks, or a week prior, a couple days prior, has prepared for this lesson, put all of his heart and soul into what he's written down, and gives a very engaging lesson. He's getting involved in what he does. He's appreciating the fact that he gets up here. He wants to do it again. What do you think God's going to want? Like before, I would hope you would pick the second one. And Mark chapter 12, verse 30, give you a second to turn there. This reads, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment." This is going back to what I've been pretty much saying this whole lesson. You have to put feeling and emotion into what you're doing. You can't just get up here and say a bunch of words that you've put together on a piece of paper without really believing and feeling what you're saying. Like, you go see a musician. Who are you going to want to see? A conductor that gets up there and just kind of does his thing, keeps time, and goes sit down. Or the one who's getting up there, waving his arms and feeling the emotion, connecting with the musicians, connecting with the audience. Which one are you going to want to go see more? I would hope the second one. Well, tonight I'm going to ask you, where's your heart? It's where your treasure is. Well, where is your treasure? Where is your treasure? Where is your mindset? I'd hope it is with God in heaven. Now, the water is here. It's warm. It's okay. It's warm. It's up here. It's ready. It's warm. Now, where's your heart? If your heart is not, you don't think your heart is in the right place, and you think you need some more extensive study, that is perfectly fine. You don't have to come to church one night, listen to a guy like me get up here and teach a lesson, and say, all right, I guess I'll go get baptized. Well, no, that's not what you should do. You should understand, appreciate, have the emotion, have the feeling, have the want to come up here and get baptized and live a faithful Christian life. Now, I am 18 years old, and according to every adult I've ever talked to, that means I know everything. I don't. So I'm about to give the invitation, and I'm about to go stand down there and sing the song. And if you don't feel comfortable coming up here and talking to some 18-year-old, telling that you need prayers with whatever you've been struggling with, I get that. It's fine. You're not going to hurt my feelings. There's several men in this audience. Greg Vick, Matt Taylor, several others that would love to come up here and would love to pray with you, pray for you. Will you come as we stand and sing?
What can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make me whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Oh, precious is the flow that makes me white as snow. No other man. Gotta move over for you.
That's a funny noise. You couldn't hear that up there, could you? Nothing. It's good. I was just making a funny noise with the mic. Well, good evening. Numbers are down this evening. I know several at Westbrook Towers supporting some of the young men there. I think Brady's given the talk. Jason he had a picture Sunday morning. He had a picture of Westbrook Towers, and he's like, "You might know what this place is?" I'm like, "I don't know. I do what place that is." You know, I was just at Westbrook Towers last week and the week before that and the week before that, but it's at night, and his picture was not what I've seen. It must have been from a different side, so, okay. Well. Turn your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 17. I'm not going to steal David's thunder. I'm not doing the line of succession between the kings of Israel and Judah. I'm going to save that for him. But I have two of my favorite, I don't want to say characters, but two of my favorite, I guess, people, because that's what they are, in the Bible are Elijah and Elisha. And maybe I'm the only one, but I bet I'm not. But I always had trouble, which one came first? And, you know, if you're like me and you like to have just pointless little things to help you remember, J comes before S. And so if you didn't know it, now you do, and now that's going to be stuck, and you're like, ha! I remember that, like port and starboard, P.S., if you're, you know, in case you ever find yourself on a ship, and you got to know which way is port and starboard. There's another for you. That one was free. All right. So there's your little tidbit. Elijah, his name means, there's two things that I found. It means Yahweh. Yahweh is my God, or my God is Jehovah, depending on who you look at. Strong's was the one that gave that second one, that my God is Jehovah. And if you have a King James Bible or a New King James Bible, and you're looking in the New Testament, the references to Elijah use the name Elias. So there's that too. But it translates, in the Greek that's how it's pronounced, but it translates to, or transliterated, I guess, to Elijah. And then, and if you look to some of the examples that we have in the Old Testament, in Matthew, there was talk about that Christ was Elijah returned. And, you know, you have at the Transfiguration, Elijah appeared, and they wanted to build, you know, tabernacles for him. And so he's very prominent. If we go to his origin, well, there's not much about it. If you think about Melchizedek, you know, Abraham met Melchizedek and he came out to him and he gave him the tithe. It's like, where did this guy come from? Same thing with Elijah. It's like, where did he come from? He just pops up. Now, I started reading, I'm like, there's got to be a reference to him before, but 1 Kings 17, verse 1, now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. Where did this guy come from? He just pops up. And here he is talking to the king and tells him, there's not going to be any rain. Like, well, that's a great first impression. First thing we meet this guy, he's telling a king, good luck, there's not going to be rain. So, Tishba, there's some people think is a city in Galilee, some think in Gilead. Some people have thought he was an Ishmaelite and not an Israelite. Some said he was an angel of God. But if you let's turn to James chapter 5. We'll go a little ways out of our way here. James chapter 5. We can refute that one pretty quickly. Verse 17, James 5:17. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the earth for 3 years and 6 months. So a man with a nature like ours, that would pretty much refute that he was an angel. But we'll also come back to the fact, we'll also, you know, kind of keep this in your mind, that he was a man just like us, and what he was able to accomplish. All right. Any thoughts, any comments, anybody? Just so Elijah, their favorite one too? Okay, that's okay. I still love you. His appearance. In 2 Kings is when we get one of the first examples of his appearance. 2 Kings, let's just go ahead and turn over there since we're not too far away. Anyway, chapter 1. 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. And this is Ahaziah asking, he said, what kind of man? He said, verse 7, he said to them, what kind of man was he who came up to meet you and spoke these words to you? They answered and said, he was a hairy man with a leather girdle bound about his loins. And he said, and this is the king said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. So it's just with that brief description, the king knew exactly who they were talking about. So when you think of this leather girdle, it just sounds so uncomfortable. There's some will speculate that it was made of camel's hair, that, was he hairy or was his clothing hairy? Some people say he had a real long beard and was just all gangly and just unkempt. Maybe. But some sort of animal skin garment. They said, let's see, some think the meaning he had very long hair and long beard. Ancient prophets all wore rough garments. Hebrews 11:37 talks about that. That talks about how, it talked about we included all this, including, it mentions Elijah, and they said that they went about in sheepskins and goatskins being destitute. So apparently that was the trend for the prophets, and if you think back, who in the New Testament dressed like that? John the Baptist. And John the Baptist also considered not really follower, not a precursor, because precursor comes before. What's the word I'm looking for if someone comes after? A successor. Kind of excessive Elijah. Good job, thank you. Appreciate it. Costume was thoroughly ascetic. Generally, the Jews wore girdles. Here's the one for you. The Jews wore girdles of linen or cotton, so your underwear, not leather. Under the girdle, they wore one of two long linen gowns, so I guess that's not the underwear. They wore long linen gowns or shirts, and over these, they sometimes had a large shawl. So wait, that's a lot of layers of clothing. Elijah only had his leather girdle and his sheepskin cape or mantle, so he was kind of bare bones. I think even in that day and age, while there were prophets that roamed around like this, that'd still be a little bit strange. Nowadays, it probably wouldn't. I work at what's that? You fit in at Walmart, yeah. Working at a high school, you never know what you're going to see. And at Walmart, you definitely never know what you're going to see. It's the luck of the draw. All right. So we start with, his ministry there in 17 verse 1. When he appears up and king, am I running out of battery? Nope. He tells the king that there's going to be a drought. Then God tells him, the word Lord came to him, saying, go away from here in 17 verse 2 and 3. Go and hide yourself by the brook Chinnereth, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you drink the brook, for I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there. So I was kind of listing, when I did my lesson for Elisha, and I came back into this with Elijah, like the miracles that occurred, whether either they brought it about or it was brought about for them. And so I'm not saying it's an exhaustive list, but I think I tried to include some, so we may go through this and be like, oh, there's one you didn't mention. Okay, cool. So really one of the first miracles, I think, if he's coming to tell a man there's not going to be any rain for 3.5 years, I'd say that's probably miraculous, that he, one, knows that, and two, that it doesn't rain for 3.5 years. I know that it takes place in the Middle Eastern region, and a lot of that's desert, and deserts aren't known for their rain, but 3.5 years is a long time. So there's one. And then by the brook, the ravens will provide for you there. So he went and did according to the Lord in verse 5, and he went and lived by the brook Chinnereth, which is east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he would drink from the brook. It's just interesting. We think, I don't know how much you guys know about birds, but ravens are known to be pretty smart. Now, granted, these ravens were not your average ravens because God sent them. But it's just, they brought him bread and meat, water in the creek. Now, what happens when a drought occurs? Well, the creek's going to dry up, and it does. And then in verse 8, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I've commanded a widow there to provide for you. So here comes the next miracle. This would be, I guess, about 3, and then coming from this will be 4. He asked the widow, he says in verse 10, she was gathering sticks. He said, Please give me a little water in a jar that I may drink. As she was going to get it, he called her and said, Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. And this doesn't tug at your heart a little bit. But she said, As the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar. And this is verse 12. And behold, I am gathering a few sticks so that I may go in and prepare for my son, that we may eat it and die. I mean, that's tragic. And it makes you think of... come back to that maybe, if it pops into my head. So her plan, she knows that there's no food. She's going to get sticks, build a fire, bake the bread, and that's going to be it. And there's lay down and give up. And so in verse 13, Elijah said to her, Do not fear. Go, do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first and bring it out to me. And of course she's thinking, did you not hear what I just told you? We're going to go make a little bread cake because that's all I got. We're going to eat it, and then we're going to die because that's all we got. And you want me to do what? You want me to not worry about me and do this for you? I mean, that's just what I imagine going through her mind. And afterwards you may make one for yourself and for your son. She's like, dude, I just told you there's not enough. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So I'm guessing if the creek dried up and he left there, it's no just 3.5 years. It may be, 3 years and 3 months. It's not going to, regardless, has anybody ever had a bag of flour or a jar of oil or bottle of oil that's never run out and you keep using it? No. So even if it's a month, whatever the case is, if she's still using it and using it and using it, and it never runs out, that's pretty special. And so she's got this jar. We were in the teen class. They asked, as we often want to do, we'll get off on tangents, and I love some of their questions because some of them just they may not have an answer, but they're neat questions. We're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, and if someone touched it, what would happen, and all those things, and then some oil that never ran out. Well, if you look at this, so it says, and the thought didn't pop in my head, but it mentions that it will not be empty until the day the day the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth, if I could get that out. So, start thinking like, well, what if that jar was still around? What if it didn't get broken? But it's irrelevant because, it stopped when the rain came. So she went and did in verse 15, and he and her household, and she and he and her household ate for many days. Why not they? The bowl of flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. Any questions, comments, anything? All right. Yeah, I won't argue with that. Miss Betty said we should have them with their banana bread. Should be making banana bread for everybody all the time, and nobody would complain. Verse 17, now it came about after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became sick, and his sickness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. So she said to Elijah, What do I have to do with you, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my iniquity to remembrance and to put my son to death. That's one thing I want to look at. No, it doesn't have. I was hoping my Bible would have a note, like some kind of time frame, but it's got nothing. But, remember, her first interaction with him was, we're going to eat, and then we're going to die. And he said, well, now, here, you're going to have food, bread. But then here her son is sick and is going to die. And then in verse 19, he said to her, Give me your son. And he took her from her bosom and carried him up to the upper room where he was living and laid him on his bed. And he called the Lord, O Lord, my God, have you also brought calamity to the widow with whom I'm staying by causing her son to die? Then he stretched himself on the child 3 times and called to the Lord, said, Oh my God, I pray you, let this child's life return to him. The Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother. See, your son is alive. Then the woman said, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is truth. So the never-ending bottle of oil and flour were not enough, but bringing a son back from either death or near death, thankfully that did it. It finally turned, I guess, if she had doubts, which sounds like she did, that changed things. All right, I was looking to see does anybody have any thoughts onto how old the son was? Does anybody have like any notes or anything? The Bible have anything? I was just curious because it talks about her being ahead of her bosom. Was he little? Was he a teen? Was he, not that it matters. He was near death, and that's tragic enough. But just curious. All right. Now, Obadiah meets Elijah in chapter 18, and Obadiah is an interesting character. Again, he comes and. Well, you find out now that Ahab has been looking for Elijah because, again, Elijah told him that it wasn't going to rain for 3.5 years. So Ahab's probably like, well, where'd that dude go? He dropped his bomb on me, and then he left. I kind of like to ask him some questions. I have a bone to pick with him. And so in chapter 18, now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now, Obadiah, and is in parentheses, now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in caves and provided them with bread and water. So here's someone who is obviously on God's side, and as we'll find a little bit later, Elijah has some moments of, it's flat out where he does not feel like his work is being noticed. He feels like it's in vain. He feels like he's the only one. Well, we know there were at least 100 there that Obadiah set aside. So Ahab tells Obadiah, go tell the king this. And Obadiah says, wait, hold on. You want me to go tell the king that you're alive and you're here. And if we go down, okay, so in verse 8, he said to him, it is I. So let's go back to 7. Now, as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he recognized him and fell on his face and said, is this you, Elijah, my master? He said to him, it is I. Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. This is Obadiah saying, he said, what sin have I committed that you are giving your servant into the hand of Ahab to put me to death? I'm like, well, that seems awful harsh. You're just going to deliver it. Just let him know that I'm here. And then verse 10, as the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent to search for you. And when they said, he's not here, he made the kingdom or nation swear that they could not find you. We've been looking everywhere for you. Nobody knew where you were. They all said they didn't know where you were, and yet here you are. The king's going to be mad because somebody was lying to him. And now you're saying, verse 12, go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. It will come about when I leave you that the Spirit of the Lord will carry you away where I do not know, so that when I come and tell Ahab he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. So Obadiah is saying, like, no, I see how this is going to play out. You disappeared last time. I'm going to go tell Ahab, I found him. He's here. Why didn't you come with me? It's like, I'm going to go tell him, and then when I come back, you're going to be gone because you have disappeared, and nobody's going to know where you are again. And then Ahab's going to be like, you lied to me, and then do what we find often kings in the Old Testament did, and kill the messenger. And so, I don't think that Obadiah's fear is totally unjustified, based on what we know about Ahab and his spouse. And so he has a little right to be concerned. In verse 13, has it not been told to my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, that I hid 100 prophets of the Lord by 50s and caves and provided them with bread and water? Now you are saying, go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. He will then kill me. It's like, I did good. I did a good thing. It's like, is that not enough? It's still going to get me killed. Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. Like, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here when you get back. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. Ahab went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, is this you troubler of Israel? So, that's not necessarily a comforting thought. Like Ahab, well, yeah, I remember you. He said, and this is Elijah, I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, because you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you have followed the Baals. Now then, send together to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So he first tells Ahab there's going to be a drought. I said, Mark, and then he tells him, I haven't made the trouble. You and your daddy did it. Mark?
It's interesting that, you see that in the Bible over and over. You see it in this world today. People's behavior is an issue, and when somebody points it out to them, it's their fault for pointing it out to them rather than looking in the mirror and saying, maybe I need to change my ways.
Or they want to blame somebody else.
Yeah, of course, it's everybody else's fault,
Yep.
right? Not theirs.
Yep. Ahab's, because, again, Elijah was the messenger that told him that it's not going to rain. So Ahab blames him because, well, it didn't rain. And so, yeah, Mark's right that, we see that today. It's like, well, it's not my fault. It's your fault. You did. Like, well, I just told you about it. Had nothing to do, and so we want to blame somebody else, and nothing's ever our own fault. It's funny how, we blame our children for that, and yet as adults, some people never grow out of that. I say funny, maybe funny is not the word, or ironic, or annoying, perhaps. Maybe that's an even better word. All right, so Elijah calls him out again, calls out Ahab again, and said, I'm not the problem. It's you and your fathers before, because you turned away from God. And so now he offers a challenge. He's throwing down the gauntlet. It says, bring out the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah, and let's have a little contest. And this is, I don't know, I think just because it would make such a good movie scene, this part. And there's some of these accounts in the Bible, I think when we teach the little kids, we gloss over some of the stuff, like Job and the vine afterwards, and the vine that's burnt up. That's a very random part, but we don't touch that. David kills Goliath with a stone. We kind of stop there when we're talking to the kids. We skip over the part where he cuts off Goliath's head with the sword, which makes for the best story. And this part coming up here, we talk about what God does with the sacrifice, and then we kind of stop there and we don't talk about the next little bit, but we will, because it's just, we're here and it's in there. Okay, so Ahab calls together the prophets, and Elijah came near the people in verse 21. How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word, probably because they're scared. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now, is that true? Is he really left alone? No, but he feels that way. And in this instance, he is alone, but he's not left alone. But he feels kind of like a one-man show. Now let them give us 2 oxen, and let them choose 1 ox for themselves, and cut it up and place it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood, and I will not put a fire under it. So we're going to, level the playing field here. We're going to compare apples to oranges, because it's not going to be fair, not going to be a fair fight. But we're going to have our altars. That's the word I'm looking for. We're going to make them the same. We're going to cut up the ox. We're going to make it, we're going to make this fair. Then you call on the name of the Lord. You call on the name of your God, verse 24, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people said, that is a good idea. We like this. Okay, we'll see how this plays out. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose 1 ox for yourself and prepare it first, for you are many, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it. He's like, you guys go first. There's a bunch of you. It's going to take you a minute. Then they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. Imagine that. And they leaped about the altar which they made. It came about at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, call out with a loud voice, for he is a god. Either he is occupied or gone aside, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and needs to be wakened. Some will say that part about him being occupied. Some of the versions and stuff I've heard translate to perhaps he's using the restroom. It's kind of what was implied, that he is indisposed at the moment. Which, just Yeah, you got to appreciate that sense of humor. So they cried, verse 28, so they cried with a loud voice and cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out on them. That sounds just fantastic. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no voice, no one answered, and no one paid attention. You have to wonder, like, these people are dancing around like a bunch of heathens, because that's exactly what they are, bleeding all over the place. Just from passing out, from blood loss and from the strain of it, and probably not eating much. It just couldn't happen to a better group. Then Elijah said to the people in verse 30, come near to me. So all the people came near to him. He's like, well, they're like, after that show, you can't, how are you going to top that? So the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel should be your name. So with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Then he arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 pitchers of water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did. And then he said, do it a third time. And they did. So if you don't like math, that's 12 pitchers of water. I'll do that for you. The water flowed around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. So he's just rubbing salt in the wound, because they couldn't do it, and they were doing all the things. He's like, I'll make mine soaking wet. Watch this. So the water flowed around, and in verse 36, at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. So it wasn't just like, it just burst into flames. This was, almost sounds like it's like a meteor that comes down and just smashes into it and just obliterates it all. I don't know, that's just, my artist interpretation there. But whatever the case was, the fire of God, it consumed everything. The water was instantly dried up, gone. Even the stones. The water being burnt up, if you got a hot enough fire, sure, but stones. That takes a lot to obliterate stones like that. So, and it's like, he finishes praying, and then God answers like that. Wouldn't it be nice if all our prayers were answered like that? They're not. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, but it sure would be nice. Or maybe not that violently, but that quickly and that assuredly. That when we get an answer, we know it, like, okay, I got it, that's the answer. Because I think sometimes we'll pray for something, and then we may get what we pray for and be like, is it really? Is this true? Is it, I don't know if that's a lack of faith, or is it just, did it really, I really got a yes. Sometimes we just uncertainty, I guess. So it's nice when we, read some of these examples of, well, there's no question that God answered that prayer. And again, like I said, sometimes we do want that. Sometimes we get, sometimes we don't. Mark?
I think you and I were talking about this the other day, weren't we? And my take on it is, I prayed for a lot of things. Some of them weren't in my best interest. I didn't get them, and that's a good thing. And some of them I got that I never prayed for that were in my best interest. I think in the end, whatever you pray for, whatever answer you get from God, whatever it may be, it's always an answer He does hear, and it's something that's always in your best interest, whatever it is.
And that's hard for us to recognize, that, that it is the answer, and that, especially if you're in the moment, to recognize that that's in our best interest. A lot of times it's hindsight. David?
It seems like maybe uncertainty isn't a huge problem. We saw from Obadiah, he was uncertain about these instructions to go to Ahab. It's when you let a persistent doubt come in, especially a doubt that you use as an excuse, like Moses at the burning bush. Well, I can't speak.
Yep.
Okay, don't worry, we'll figure this out. But God, I can't speak. Okay, we'll send Aaron. But God, I can't speak. Look, I'm in charge. You're going to do this. It wasn't his initial uncertainty that was so much the problem. It was that continued doubting that led to being an excuse to not do what God wanted.
And not opening our eyes to the possibility that maybe this is what God wants, especially if it's something that we know to be aligned with His will. Did I see Ed? He's coming for you.
All the examples you've talked about today of putting God first, just tonight. Make me a cake first. You know, you don't have enough ingredients to make but one more final bill, but start with me. Putting God first. He was a man of God. He was recognized as a man of God by the widow. In this account of the prophets of Baal against Elijah, we think of putting the water on there to soak it down because, you know, that's going to be even more because it was sopping wet. But let's think for a minute a different way. Imagine it had not rained locally since November of 2019.
That's a good point.
That's three and a half years. How much is a pail of water going to cost? They've already cut up an ox and put it on an altar and left it there all day to rot in the sun. Now you're going to cut up another ox and you're going to put it on another altar. Now you're going to take the most precious thing you've got, water, and you're going to soak it down. That's faith. And that's giving the best to God.
I had never considered. I appreciate you sharing that because that's absolutely true. I mean, where did this water come from? You know, if
It had to come out of the ground deep.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I had not considered. That's a good point. Thank you. Anything else? Any other thoughts? All right. All right. So the fire burned everything. Okay, here we go. Verse 39, when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, "The Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God." Then Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let one of them escape." So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. That's it. It just ends there. So at least 450 people, because it says the prophets of Baal. I would guess that the other prophets were brought down there too. Don't know. But at least 450 people right there, just slew them there, and they get a sentence. Their death gets a sentence. And barely that. And then it goes down, and then he's like, okay, well, now, it's like, next scene, and Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of the roar of a heavy shower." I don't know how much time has passed, but Ahab's probably like, what just happened? You just killed these people, and now you're telling me just to go and act like nothing's wrong? So verse 42, so Ahab went up to eat and drink, but Elijah went up to the top of Carmel, and he crouched down on the earth and put his face between his knees. He said to his servant, "Go up now, look towards the sea." So he went up and looked, said, "There's nothing." Seven times he did this. Came about the seventh time, he said, "Behold, a cloud as small as a man's hand is coming up from the sea." And he said, "Go up to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down so that the heavy shower does not stop you." So he tells his servant to go tell Ahab, "You better get out of here because the rain's going to come and your chariot's going to be bogged down." The sky grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy shower. Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and this is one again that just gets a brief mention, and I wish it didn't, because it just seems like it's interesting. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and outran Ahab to Jezreel. On the surface, that sounds like he outran a chariot. Also says that the hand of the Lord was on him, so he probably outran a chariot. And chariots are pulled by horses, and horses are fast. People are not that fast. But it's just, I just find that interesting. You see this man in weird leather clothes, hike it up, and just take off running and outrun a chariot pulled by horses. Now, maybe he went the shortcut. I don't know. But regardless, God was with him, and he beat Ahab there. Just neat. Maybe that's just me, but that's okay. All right, Jezebel. That's what everybody wants to name their daughter. Now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and even more if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." I think if you just kind of look at things, you can kind of tell who wears the pants in that relationship. And he was afraid, he being Elijah, was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. He went off a day's journey into the wilderness, and here's where you see some of his despondency, some of his depression. And he went himself a day's journey, came, sat down under a juniper tree, and requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers." This man has already done several miraculous sayings. He has seen a lot. He just stood for God against, 750 people? Is that right? No, 850 people. And here he is already throwing in the towel. Does that happen to us? Obviously, we're not necessarily standing up and causing miraculous things to occur in the face of, 400 or 850 prophets. But do we find ourselves like that sometimes? Yeah, I'm sure. Sure there's times where we feel like, when we're doing things, we're working in the church, we're doing stuff for other people, but yet things aren't going right. Things are, we've got sickness, we've got a loss of family, we've got cars breaking down, we've got this, that, and the other. But we're doing what you want. Why is this? Why is this happening to us? Why are we being, what's wrong? Why are we not gaining? And we look at these other people who are out there who couldn't care less about faith in God, and they're prospering. And I think at times, if you're human, it probably gets to you. It gets you down a little bit. And so here's Elijah. He is down in the dumps. He lay down and slept under a juniper tree in verse 5, and behold, there was an angel touching him, and he said, "Arise and eat." Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Arise, because the journey is too great for you." So he rose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. So 2 meals. Sounds like it lasted him 40 days and 40 nights. I don't know what that was, but that's a pretty good food. So he came to a cave, and he lived there in verse 9. And let's see. I already covered that. Okay. This is, again, just another interesting piece. In verse 11. Let's go back. He's in this cave, and he's still feeling down. God came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Verse 9. Verse 10, he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." Again, he still feels that he's the only one. So he said, "Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a gentle blowing. So you've got these three just very volatile, not weather patterns, but just events. You've got the wind that's breaking rocks. You've got an earthquake, which, it's obviously breaking rocks, and then a fire. But those great and powerful things, that was not where the Lord was. He was in the gentle blowing. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat, and of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place." So he's told, you're going to go anoint 2 more kings, and you're going to anoint your successor. And he says, verse 18, "Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." So here Elijah is thinking he's the only one, but he's not. There's at least 7,000. So he departed from there in verse 19 and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, while he was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen. This kind of gets into my lesson of Elisha, which I want to do, but we're not going to do that now because time's about out. But so Elisha is to become his successor. And if we skip on real fast, we got just a minute or two, to 2 Kings chapter 2, we will hit just the last little bit of Elijah as he is carried up. Actually, we'll do chapter 1 real fast. You've got Ahaziah, who is Ahab's son, is sent to... that's not what's supposed to happen. Nope. There we go. You've got the story of Naboth's vineyard where Jezebel has Naboth killed so that Ahab can have the vineyard. That's in the end of 1 Kings 21. And then Elijah in true form, he calls out Ahab and Jezebel again. Jezebel is killed and the dogs eat her. Ahab, however, sees that and shows humility, and God's hand is stayed on him, and it ends up calling the destruction and the judgment on Ahab's lineage. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so he rebukes Ahaziah because Ahaziah ends up falling through the lattice and he gets injured, and he calls and asks for the Baals, and Elijah says, "Why? You knew me. Why didn't you call me?" And then there are two sets of messengers that come. One comes with 50. The next one comes with 50. They all end up burnt up with flames, captain with 50s. And the third one comes, and he prostrates himself and says, "Listen, I know you're a man of God, but please hear me out. Come with me." So he comes back to Ahaziah and rebukes him and foretells of his death. And then we get to the part where, in chapter 2, where he's taken up to heaven. So he's walking with Elisha. And Elijah keeps telling Elisha, he says, "Stay here." And they go further down the road, "Stay here." And I think that's 3 times he does that. And he says, "Nope, I'm coming with you wherever you go." And so they went, and if you're familiar with the story, Elijah says, what do you want? What do you ask of me? And what Elisha asked for is basically what a firstborn son would have. I want to follow in your footsteps, in which he was anyway, because God already told him to anoint him as his successor. And in just going with everything else that Elijah has done and just the grandeur of it, he is carried up to heaven in a chariot of fire, driven by horses of fire. Again, just the imagery of that. I mean, to have seen stuff like that. But it shows Elijah's life, even in the times when he was down, it still showed his unfailing commitment to God. Now, did he feel he was all alone? Yes, because at times he kind of was, but in all actuality, he wasn't. But that's one of the things, if you look some of the commentaries and stuff, they'll say that Elijah was the prophet of commitment. We need to be committed. Hopefully we don't ever have to stand against 850 prophets, but we need to be committed like he was. Again, going back to James chapter 5, talks about his prayer and how he was a man just like us, but God listened and answered his prayer. You've got closing prayer, don't you? Any thoughts before we? All right. Thank you, guys.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this evening, which you've given us to come together, to worship, to hear lessons from your word. And we're so thankful for all of the people here who work hard to make this congregation work, all those who give lessons, who give invitations, all the young men who start early to learn to do that. We're so thankful for all those who work behind the scenes, who we don't necessarily always think about, all the small jobs that it takes to keep your work going. We're so thankful for all those that participate. Thankful that you've brought us through the week so far. Help us to feel recharged after this, to go back out into the world for the rest of the week and to do your good will. Please, Lord, go with all those who were mentioned earlier, who are sick, who are struggling, and all those who weren't mentioned but who we all know who are struggling and need your help. Please, Lord, just go with us always and forgive us our sins. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.